Every day, you essentially pay your dues by doing the harder thing when it's the right thing to do.
Let's now actually have a conversation on the important thing, which is physiology and psychology and anatomy and load management and communication. Because cool. So these were the big questions. So now maybe we can go through a little shorter questions.
Sure.
Do you think it's possible to have an elite athlete winning gold medal in the Olympics, no injuries or no major injuries? No.
Nope.
Okay.
I think that sports are inherently risky and dangerous. And that is kind of like part of you sign the dotted line when you get to that level. We work with professional baseball players. We work with, elite CrossFit athletes. We work with powerlifters. And one of the reasons that sports is so impressive is because people are able to reach just the pinnacles and the upper limits of human physiology and the capacity, right? And I think that it's hard, it's impossible. Nothing's impossible, but very challenging to get to that level of the upper echelon of human potential and force on your body without having some sort of ache or pain or injury or stuff like that. Now, I don't think that what's happening with that statement is that people then use that as a catch-all for like every injury and letting shit just fly. There's like, you're going to get hurt. So like, whatever, just let it go. Like this is just gymnastics. Like that is extremely dangerous. And I don't think that's the way it should be. Like we shouldn't be haphazard in terms of how we approach it. We should be constantly trying to maximize performance and minimize injury risk. But the reality of elite anything, not only gymnastics, is it comes with wear and tear on your body. And I think the reason that I'm very open and I say that is because in almost every other sport, that decision to pursue that exchange and that collateral damage is made by a fully mature adult who is willing to accept that risk and accept that long term, right? So like baseball, for example, throwing a baseball is bad for your elbow, bro. Like there's no way around it. It is bad for your shoulder. But when you have a 22-year-old, 24-year-old male or female softball player saying, I'm consciously choosing to do this, and I'm also going to do all of the things I can to try to reduce the risk of that with my time management, my sacrifice, that is it's an educated decision that somebody makes to take on the risk, right? That is not what happens in gymnastics. We have 10, 12, 14-year-olds, wildly immature, wildly underdeveloped, and wildly under physical preparation peak, doing the same thing that some of these other athletes who are fully mature are making, which is why I think it starts to become a slippery slope there, which is it starts to become they have a goal and they're so young and they don't know what's best for them sometimes, but then parents and coaches are the ones who are pulling the puppet strings on their career. And so that's where I think that I'm such a fan of trying to really push the age limit of juniors and seniors in international competition higher. I don't think that just changing the age limits makes it all go away, but with education and with overhaul, you get to the point where someone's 16 and they can start making decisions for themselves. That is, what do you want to do with your career? What do you want to do with your body? What do you want to do with how your long-term health is? And you can make a little bit more informed, educated decision versus like 10, 12 years old. Gymnastics is one of the few sports that is asking those decisions to be made on someone who is just wildly immature. So I know that it's probably a high risk of injury or a high risk of mental stress and emotional stress as well. And I don't want to ask somebody at a young age who doesn't know the long-term consequences of those things to be making those choices, so young.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Yes. So it ties in a lot with like what you were talking about earlier about this, the training hours and like training their age and stuff like that.
Correct.
Although like I would say, because I've worked like I had the privilege of like training alongside or just still being in contact with a lot of like high level, like the best in the world within the tumbling discipline. What I've noticed a lot is these senior athletes that are like the best in the world, like competing really high. They're training less and less as they get older.
Yeah.
And they're taking it down rather than going up, which I think is like a real boss move. That they get to that point where they they've come over this hill of like the learning, like they've learned the majority of things and they're coming down and they're learning to use it, and they're just training really efficiently with their time, reducing the amount of impact, and it's very effective, which makes me think like this, what you're talking about, like this training their age in hours is like this linear correlation is maybe a lot more like a bell curve.
Correct.
Where you start off a lot lower and then there's a peak in your training hours when you're at the peak moment of acquiring like skill and ability in the sport. And then it curves off again at the end. And the idea is like, how do we manipulate where that bell curve is, like the peak of the bell curve is in their maturity, to find like the best amount of like health in their sports.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think the role of a parent and a coach in those younger years, 8, 10, 12, 14, is to maximize the potential and the environment for them to make that decision for themselves. And what I mean for that is if you have a coach who is technically educated, they're really good communicators, the parents are really supportive, they can still maintain that aspect of fun while still developing the technical foundations, the basics they would need should they choose to continue pursuing their goals. So I don't think it's the role of a coach and a parent to force them onto that path. It's to max. My buddy Brett Wargo calls this the technical ceiling, to maximize their technical ceiling or their upper limit of their performance abilities by giving them all the raw materials and all the basics and all the foundational things that they need to be healthy in the sport, but keep going, so that when they do mature. Bro, I don't know if this works in tumbling. How many people do you know are starry-eyed, want to go to the Olympics, but they get to 14 and then boys and girls and social life and other sports get involved and they're like, not for me anymore. You know what I mean? There's so many kids that get to like the social world of high school and they just change their mind, which is totally fine. But like your goal, not your job, I don't want to say that. Your role as a coach and as a parent is to really give them a great experience when they're younger and develop the basic foundations of what they should want to do to be healthy in the sport and keep going, so that as they get older, they can make those choices for themselves with not only the raw material technically and foundationally and physically and mentally, whatever, but also just your perspective and your input about like what the options are and what they can do and what it would require, and make an informed decision as they get older. That's what I personally think is great. And then, yes, I agree is that when they're younger and you want to teach all these skills, you can develop, dude, you can teach the Tkachevs, you can teach double backs, full ins. There's so many great technological progressions of the equipment that you can teach all these skills in a good way, in a safe way, in a healthy way, and just not compete them. You know what I mean? Like you can still do it all and just keep the athletes healthy as they get through puberty. But then once they get to like 14, 15, you can start having decisions like, okay, well, like, do you still want to go to college? Do you still want to go to national team? Do you still want to do whatever? Do you want to go play soccer and say, this was fun, but I'm ready to move on? You can then give them the best opportunity to pursue, if they still have those goals, what they want, because they get to 14, 15 and they're maturing now. Their power is up, their strength is up, their mental capacity is up. They can make those sacrifices and mentally construct, okay, what do I have to do to get to this level? And then they can start really executing on some of the technical foundations you've built them, but it's still their decision. It's still what they want, right? And like I'm always reverse engineering. What do you want out of gymnastics? What do you want out of being here? And some people, it's like, I want to be with my friends and do fun stuff. It's like, sick, awesome. Other people, I want to get this skill because it's really, something I've been working for. Cool. I want to get to this level. Awesome. I want to make this school. I want to make this team, this division one. Yeah. Everyone has their goals, and you reverse engineer what those macro goals are into smaller steps. And it all comes down to foundations and techniques and basics and strength and all kind of stuff. But then if you're doing it right, it's easier to learn really hard skills with that base, and you can be more efficient with your time in the gym. You can pick up on these things easier. And as you say, you don't need all this junk mileage, quote unquote, all this collateral damage of hours and hours and hours and hours of trying to learn the skill, because you have the raw material. And then, yes, of course, you have to put in your 10 reps. You have to put in your reps on hard. You have to actually compete and be safe. But not, it's just like doing it over and over and over and over and over again because you're trying to like catch up. So yes, it is that bell curve, and the best coaches, the best athletes are the ones that are just relentless on the boring basic stuff that nobody wants to do, so that they don't have to kill themselves in repetitions.
Yeah. I think when you get to a certain age, when you're a senior athlete in tumbling, for sure, because if you've been coached well and you're a senior level international class athlete, you know all the skills. Now you can do full in, full out, full, Miller, triple tuck, triple pike, hopefully full and triple. Now it's about time, just put it in the middle of the track, transition out of it, figure it out, get stronger, get faster, whatever. And I think at that point, gymnastics happens, or your performance is influenced and just significantly more of what happens outside of the gym. You don't need to be in the gym 25 hours a day,
Right.
25 hours a week. Sorry. You need to be in the gym just a little bit, but then you need to sleep well every night. You need to eat well. You need to eat well. Not every single day. We're not trying, no one is like the food police. Like it makes no sense. Some people love that. Some people enjoy the feeling of, I don't like junk food. But some people need that for their mental health.
Right.
Just because, if they feel like they're like constantly being their own police, that's just a bad feeling. And then it just comes down to how much are you willing to sacrifice outside of the gym? It's not about you coming into the gym and doing more. Jamie and I've had an athlete, like an international, part of the national team of Belgium, saying to us, I remember having a conversation with her, doing a transition in the middle of the track is not like any other skill. This just takes numbers. It's not about getting it. It's about doing 1,000. She, after 2.5 hours of training, straight up looks at me, 26-year-old with a bachelor's in kinesiology and doing her master's in physio, looks at me and goes, okay, can I do 50 today? I didn't know what to say. I looked at her and I was like, no, absolutely not. You can do 3 more if you really want to. Like in their head, it doesn't, like they don't understand. It's like, did you sleep well tonight? Did you eat well tonight? This entire day? Otherwise, it doesn't matter.
On this point, there's something really important here, which I want to tease on, which is one of the best coaching tools and also things you can give to the athlete is the very present conscious training, right? What I mean by that is take a turn that goes terribly and critically think, okay, why did that go wrong? Let me watch film. Let me think about drills. Let me think about technically what maybe, didn't go well. One Lindsay Stansel, who has been on the podcast, she's phenomenal at explaining this, which is like, I'd rather someone take 8 turns of release moves, but in between each one, we watch film. Okay, why did it go well? Why did it not go well? Oh, my hand was here. My eyesight, I didn't look where the rail was and I missed that. Like really reverse engineering turns to really understand at a foundational level the technique. Those turns are so much more lucrative and yield rewarding than 15 or 20 in a row where you're just banging them out. There is a time and a place for like just reps, because you have to, get the rhythm and understand and drill in like a really good technique. But for the vast majority of time, 8 turns with really good critical feedback in between and really good analysis. And if it's not going well, going back to drills and figuring out why it's not going well. I had a male senior national team athlete who's in college. I don't want to, sell him out here, but he's just one of the nicest dudes I've ever met. He works his face off. He is just really in the running for, Paris and high level stuff. And he was amazing when he went to school. Don't get me wrong. And he was really high level, already on national team. And then he competed this last summer at US championships. And I saw him before he went back to school for a bunch of like just screening and stuff. And I was like, yeah, like, what do you notice has been different, in you're going into sophomore year versus freshman year of university? He's like, I'm just much more analytical. He's like, I really understand what my turns are composed of. He's like, I'm not just doing 10 peach Dioms in a row or a bunch of Kovacs in a row. He's like, I take a turn, I think about it. I'm very critical about what went well, what didn't go well. He's like, and I'm just very like methodical now with how I take my turns and I analyze. He's like, and the amount of like juice I can squeeze out of the orange, so to speak, with practices, because I'm so critically thinking about what I'm doing. It's not just blowing through 20 peaches because I just need to get the reps in. He's like, I'm so much smarter with my turns. And he's like, not only am I just make strides faster technically, but he's like, also my body feels so much better because it's not 25 turns of a peach until one kind of felt well. He's like, it's 10 turns and I really understand why they're going well or not going well. So that feedback loop, back to the conversation of training hours, you could be in the gym 25 hours, but if you're approaching it like that, where you're on an event for an hour and you're thinking about what you're doing and you're doing drills and you're reverse engineering it, like that's super healthy, right? Versus like 45 minutes on an event, 15 hours per week where you're just cramming numbers in. Yeah. Like that is one of the most important skills I think a coach can have and that can pass down to an athlete.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's very interesting because like I've noticed a lot of like this is basically connecting two thoughts I had in my head that I didn't realize were connected. This idea, like when you have coaches who are stood at the side of the apparatus, like the gymnast is like training, and they have that mentality of like always like reactive coaching. Like they do a go and it's straighten your arm, then they do another go and it's hold your head, and then they do another go and it's point your toes, like this. And it's like just every single go they're like throwing something different at the kid,
Mm,
and the way that the kid is like responding to that is they know every single go like something else is going to change, and they kind of lose concentration on it, lose the ability to really focus on what like the coach is saying, rather than like standing at the side of the piece of apparatus and the kid takes their turn and you say, where's your head in? You ask them the questions and things like that, and they have to think about it, and they go back. Maybe like you take less goals and they take a lot more time thinking about what they're doing, like consciously training, like what you said.
mm,
um but it makes a big difference. And then I've never sort of connected that idea to like coaching in that style. Like more
mm,
effective coaching can have a big influence like physically on the gymnast, because you
correct.
can do less load on the
Yeah.
gymnast
Correct.
and more conscious training. And this
Correct.
idea of just standing at the side and just like there's numbers, and just keep shouting things at the gymnast, and just get those numbers in. Like that's not
Yeah.
only less effective, but
A really good
physically
example of
unhealthy.
this, which I saw firsthand early on in my career, was Miley O'Keefe is one of the best, collegiate gymnasts now, but she was winning juniors when she was like younger. And I had the opportunity to do a lot of camps at their gym with Tammy and Sarin. And when I tell you that Miley was an absolute stick of dynamite on beam at a young age, that girl could like literally open the code and do whatever she wanted. But watching how they managed her reps and managed her body and managed technically was really eye opening for me, which was, I think she was working like side aerial layout, step out, full, like just insane series, like just ridiculous, right? Like, but like you would watch her do like aerial layout, step out, and it'd be a little bit off. And Tammy would just watch and say, like, let's try another go. She would do another one, it's kind of off, and she'd be like, okay, let's come off the high beam. Let's figure out why is this happening? Are your hips square? Go back to the laser beam. Let's do some drills. Like it was just this like almost like poetic process of two people working together to like reverse engineer why it's not going well. What can we do? What drills do we have? Is this a flexibility thing? Is it a strength thing? Are we just tired today and we just got to hang it up and come back tomorrow? Like just really thoughtful execution of like a beam. And like maybe she did 7 series over the course of a half hour, but it was just
Hmm.
so particulate, right? And I think that's one of the reasons. And Miley was just on the podcast, and she was like, I think one of the reasons why I never had any major injuries, knock on wood, before going to college, is she was like, I was never just getting thrown to volume. I was never just doing layout, step outs, and all these things over and over. Even at the pinnacle of her junior career, it was still very slow and methodical, and very critical on the way she did it. And yeah, I think it's a big reason why she probably never had a back fracture. She probably never had, something crazy. And with double twisting Yurchenko too, when she was younger, she just wasn't strong enough to get enough whip action onto the board to get high enough. Like physically, she just hadn't grown enough, and she wasn't strong enough, and technique just didn't make sense. And Sarin, her other coach, would just, nope, we're not doing it on hard today. Nope, we're not ready yet. Like we're at national camps, we're not quite ready yet. Like, and Serena would just sit there and smile and just take the heat from Miley. Like, no, we're not doing it. We're not ready yet. And she said, Miley was just like, one day I just got it. Maybe I was strong. Maybe it just happened that day, and it worked. And then she did it. And it was well. But like the
Yeah.
amount, back to like full circle this conversation, the amount of self awareness and the amount of work it takes to be critically thinking through skills and not just getting angry and being like, just go. I just want you to go. You know what I mean? Like mental blocks in particular, like it takes so much resolve and self-esteem, and it takes a spine to stand up to some of the pressures when people want you to do these high level skills or push at a certain age. Like I respect Tammy and Sarin so much because they were literally at the pinnacle of what you would say is like the opportune moment, which is we have this fit. She won juniors and she could make national team and blah, blah, blah. And they just went slow. And then, they didn't need Miley to be successful for them to be happy. They were the same wonderful, happy humans as they were inside and outside the gym. And you could see it because they detached themselves from Miley's career. They wanted to help and support her and obviously be a part of it, but they didn't need Miley to be successful for them to be happy. And it allowed them the calm headspace to critically think about skills and critically think about engineering routines and what meets and what we were doing. Like it was very evident to me at a young age that they were detached from it, and it allowed them to be better coaches because of it. Because when you're in it, you're so emotional and you're hearing all the things and you get fear and you're like, oh my God, we got to go and we got to do these skills now. And then one double full land short and she tears her ACL. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
that's not
Yeah.
always happens like that, but that's a very possible situation when you think emotionally like that and you're like, let's just do it. you know?
Yeah, I think. Are you familiar with Enjo Huberman?
I've listened to every podcast.
That's amazing. Me too. So when he talks about skill learning, he mentions how the literature focuses a lot on as many repetitions per given unit of time, focus on one single thing, and then once every 10, 5, 10 goes, depending on the long, like the amount, the length of the turn, stop, let your brain run it in like 20 times speed, like a million times, then go again.
Yep.
And he says the number one factor, which I think for gymnastics is like absurd, for old school style coaching to hear that. The number one factor for getting better is making mistakes.
Yes.
And I think I certainly was that coach when I was a
Me
younger
too.
coach. Like,
Me
you're
too.
not allowed to do
Always
any
perfect
skill.
all the time, never a mistake.
If your legs were not straight on this back handspring, you're not doing two. I don't care.
Yeah.
I don't care. It's not good. But like then listening to that and evolving and seeing more gymnasts and seeing more coaches and training myself, because it's funny enough. Like I started training and coaching literally the same day. It's like I remember when I was teaching myself how to do a triple back, there was absolutely no way I was going to do it perfectly. I knew that. I didn't care. I figured it out. I just did one. But then same day, 3 hours ago, I was in a gym looking at gymnasts saying, "You're not doing two. No. How can you do two back springs? One is not perfect." And I think I am struggling to connect how to use, I would call this the perfect turn, where the perfect turn starts you knowing what you're looking for and finishes with you knowing what happened. And then you kind of, slowly match the two and know what you need to do now. And that takes a long amount of time, which kind of takes the amount of turns down per given unit of time. And I'm trying to figure out, how do you blend the two? And then maybe when you first learn a skill, it's more about doing the repetitions on something that is physically not demanding. So for us, that would be like a fast track or trampoline. And then when you get slightly bigger, stronger, better at the skill, and now we're trying like to nail the small bits of it down.
Right.
Maybe there you would, okay, now just analyze. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So there's two pieces here. One is there's a very interesting parallel between the psychological productivity, mental health side of things, and then the technical development of things in relation to this idea of an environment that allows you to fail safely, right? And fail and accept that. And so there's this, I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with this study, but there was a study from Google and they tried to measure the most highly productive teams. And they tried to measure who is the most productive, who does the most. And then also there was a really good book called The Culture Code, which looked at Navy SEALs. They looked at, I want to say like maybe like the LA basketball team. I forget what it's called, but they just looked at like the most successful high performing teams. And obviously the SEALs in America, right? Like there's a lot on the line, right? And what they found is that the highest performing teams have psychological safety. And what psychological safety is that in a work setting, you're able to present ideas that come to you openly and on the cuff, and no one's going to shit on you when, you say something, and that can be like, are you kidding me? Like, that's the dumbest idea I've ever heard. Right. Like, and on the SEALs team side or the basketball side or whatever, it's that there's an environment, a culture that not only fosters the ability and the safety to make mistakes and be okay with it, but they actually encourage it because they want to hear people are thinking openly and without fear of judgment, without people, jumping on top of their negativity or whatever. But that translates to a gymnastics environment or a sporting environment, which is you're building an environment. You have to build a culture and an environment that it's okay to mess up, because that is where that critical feedback loop comes of, okay, what went wrong? Why did it go wrong? Let's reverse engineer it. Let's break this down. Let's find some drills. That's a constructive way to build that skill set. And that's a massively important skill for life. But you can make the argument that probably the same phenomenon of when you make a mistake or you eat it or something doesn't go well, do your teammates support you and say, hey, that's normal. That's how it goes. This is how we learn. Does your coach do that? Or is it like side eye and gossip and psychological warfare of like, of course you missed a series, like it's that dynamic you build. And not only is it about being okay with mistakes, like you don't want to encourage people to screw up, obviously, but people generally are trying to do the best they can. But it's about being like, this is how we learn, and reframing that as this is productive. This is okay, instead of the opposite, which is all perfection at all times, no matter what. And that becomes extremely damaging, right? And you could argue that's where a lot of the concerns come up with body image, right? And with health and the way they look. And a lot of people being nervous about that because you always have to be shredded and six pack and lean and gymnast fit, which is the most bullshit term I've ever heard of, right? It makes you think that you always have to be this perfect thing. You have to be perfect execution. It's never good enough. How do you think kids get into a massive loop of depression when it's never good enough? It's always more. It's always not
Yeah.
good enough. Okay, you made one turn good. Now you make 5 turns perfect. You won at this meet. Now win all your meets. You made this team, great. Now make this team. You made the Olympics, great. Make it again. You made a gold medal, good. Win a gold medal the next quad. It's like, Jesus Christ, like that's just an impossible, relentless standard, and that's how a lot of coaches and young kids get in a really dark spot because they think that if I make it, it should be better. And if I don't do it, I'm a piece of shit and I feel awful about it. Right. So like you have this unrelenting standard, which is when you do it, it's not good enough. And if you don't do it, you're awful, and like that
Yeah.
is such a dangerous way versus nobody learns like that. Like there's no skill in the world that you learn like that. You make mistakes, you have supportive feedback and you work your way forward and you get better and better and better. Like that's the healthy, normal way from obviously Huberman and many other people's research, but just like being a good person, just being nice, like being
Yeah.
kind and empathetic. Like that's just a good way to operate in life.
It's amazing how impactful it is just being a good person.
It's ridiculous.
Simplest
Right
thing in
here,
the
man.
world, the amount of
My
impact.
model. Be nice, work hard. That's all I care about.
Yeah, literally, it's like the amount of impact that you make where you come in the gym like you sometimes I get yesterday I had an argument with a 13-year-old boy, and how 13-year-old boys are. It's like it's a
We've all been there.
yeah, and I'm just trying to teach him how to do a straight back squat because he's rounded back in the squat. And like he's like getting pissed at me, like, why are you forcing me to, what do you want? I just want to do my standing tuck just to a higher mat. I'm like, this, I can't let you do this to a higher mat with a rounded back. You're going to mess your spine up.
Yeah.
And I had, after 10 minutes of like, me trying to like force it and like, just, I stopped. Like, look, listen, if you want, we can stop right now. I'll let you go on trampoline and jump into the pit because that's safe. You don't need to know how to land in a pit. I will never let you, I'm not going to let you land because whether you believe me or not, I'm on your side. I promise I'm on your side. I'm just trying to make sure you don't wake up in pain because I have woken up with pain in my back when I was younger. My leg stopped working for 2 weeks. That was terrifying. I don't want that to happen to you.
Yeah.
Immediately, attitude change. It was like, oh, okay, no. Teach me. Immediately, attitude change because he realized no one is against you. It's teamwork. Cooperate with me. Trying to help you. It's like when I once had the opportunity to work in a club, like not as a permanent coach, just as come here, advise us on, like it was an acro coach. It was an acro club, and I was like, come here and teach us how to do better flips, basically. And I remember like coming in one day and saying like, I had this girl, and like she was like, I'm not getting this double Arabian. I'm not getting it. I was like, okay, let's do this. I was like, no, this is not working. And like at some point I was like, stop, look. If you ever come into a restaurant and you say, my favorite dish is a burger with fries, and then the waiter tells you, cool, this is $30. Here are your burgers and fries. And you say, I don't want these burgers and fries. Get the fuck off my face. Why are you forcing me to pay? Like you realize what's like, it's not working out, like you asked me to make a better double Arabian.
Yeah.
I'm sorry if my knowledge is not sufficient. This is what I know. This is, they paid for me to come here like an hour away drive so that I can teach you this skill.
Yeah.
Please let me help you.
Yeah.
Please let me help.
Something I have learned the hard way, and I think is really important for people to understand. Two things. One is, to your point, nobody cares how much you know until they know how much you care. Right?
Yeah.
They're not going to listen to anything that you have to say if they don't genuinely believe that you have their best interest in mind, their goals, you trust them, you care about them as a human, minus the gymnastics. Like that's really important. But the second piece is 13-year-old boys. As someone who has spent I don't know what the best way to say it. Someone who spent an enormous amount of hours with 11 to 16-year-old girls, I can tell you for a fact that you cannot make anyone do anything. Like, I don't care what you say. You cannot, right? Like, dude, there's some times when it's crystal clear what I think needs to happen in terms of like, we have to do these flexibility things or this strength or these drills because you have told me that you have this goal of this skill, this level, not getting hurt, enjoying your friends. And I'm telling you from my experience, what I've seen work is doing this over and over or whatever, right? And at the end of the day, some of the girls just don't want to do it. They want to cheat on their pull-ups. They want to skip the drills. They want to talk in the chalk bucket. And like, okay, like, all right, What's another fundamentally important thing we learn about in gymnastics that happens everywhere? That choices have consequences. Sometimes they're good
Yeah.
consequences, and sometimes they're bad consequences. I'm not saying they're all bad, but if you want to skip all the drills and you don't want to do your routines and you don't want to do this, okay, well, one, I'm not going to let you do the skill competition because it's not safe. So that's just one. But two is the skills you do, if you don't practice them and you don't do your physical prep, and then you go to the meet and you fall 4 times and you get a 6 and you're really upset, okay, that's a consequence, right? The other option is you do the skills, you do the physical prep. It's hard. We don't want to do it, but we get through it. You do your repetitions, you go to sleep early, you wake up and you get a good night's sleep, and you come to the gym and work hard and you do all your stuff. You hit the set of your life and you get a 9. That's a positive consequence to your choice. But I've now gone to the approach of, in the moment, I go, okay, that's okay. Make your choice. You're not going to distract other people. You're not going to bring away from my workout, but make your choice and that's fine. When 6 weeks from now, when you're really upset with the outcome, we're going to reverse engineer back to this moment, right? Like, and I'm like, we're going to revisit this down the road. And that's part of the art of coaching, is safely helping people fall in a controlled way, which
That's
is that
interesting.
moment of what I call in my personal life, which was my coworkers don't want to listen to me because they think I'm an asshole, and the kids don't want to listen to me. They say I'm playing favorites, whatever. That's an emotional catalyst. That's for me being like, oh, that hurts my heart inside because I care about that. For these athletes, not performing well when they want to, or something happens down the road where they don't get a goal, that moment of sadness or disappointment is an emotional catalyst for behavior change. And you can harness those moments and use them productively, right? In your own life as a personal, but also with the athletes, which is like at the meet, right? Fall, chalk up, tears, fall, chalk up, get me off this event, salute. In the moment, you're like, hey, it's okay. Like we have another event to do. It is what it is. Let's move on. We'll deal with it on Monday at the gym. Let's safely get through this meet. Honestly, I've scratched athletes before because they melt down and it's not safe for them to continue the meet. I'm like, we're just gonna call it
Yeah.
today, honey. We're just gonna move on. It's fine. This meet
Yeah.
doesn't matter, right? Even if it's a national meet, this meet doesn't matter in your life. But on Monday, I'm gonna, hey, can you come in 15 minutes early? And he's like, chop this up, by ourselves in private, not in front of the group. Like Sunday was uncomfortable for both of us. Like you were not happy and I hurt for you, but like this is an opportunity to reflect on why we got to this place and change some behaviors. Or if it went really well and you smashed it and it was the best meet of your life, let's reverse engineer that too and figure out what did you do that went well. And I think that's such an important skill, back to the critical thinking pieces, to not force people to do anything, but be able to understand that choices have consequences. And that's another huge skill for them to learn in their life. And then we paint those pictures backwards. And the same athlete that I talked about who's going through who had a tough time with her father and all that kind of stuff, we text regularly. She's in college now, and she had some really tough issues with body image, and she transitioned to powerlifting and she's smashing it right now. But like in the same exact conversation I had with her when she was 14 about doing a straddle back when she was scared shitless and choices of consequences is the same conversation I'm having with her now about making choices about how she's living her life and what she wants out of like relationships with a guy she was dating. I'm like, sweetheart, it's the same thing, is that these choices have consequences and you have to make choices that are best for yourself. And this moment you feel of pain where it's not going well, it reverse engineers the choices we made prior. And this is a lesson that's just looping itself over and over again in your life. And so like that again is a critical skill, back to why I'm in gymnastics, is like that's a crucial skill to learn, which is my choices, accountability. What I do and what I choose to do dictates the outcome down the road to maximize my goal going well.
Yeah.
Do you find like a difference in like with respects to this, like instructing your gymnasts and helping them on like the mental side, between like instructing them as a coach and instructing like gymnasts as a physio?
Yeah. Yes and no. I'm very clear. And to be frank, I actually stepped away from coaching like 9 or 12 months ago because the company is doing well. So that's important to say. But when I was there, if I was there as a coach, I was a coach. My coaching hat was on, and I just happened to know a little bit about physio that I could help maybe get some educated information or strength conditioning, whatever. But if things ever got to the point where it needed a medical assessment, I said, you have to come to the clinic. And then I'm a physio, which is I'm a physio who happens to know a lot about gymnastics. In the coaching world, I'm a coach who happens to know a lot about physio. And I was very clear about, one is legality wise, but two is also I don't want to ever blur the lines on what the main purpose of me being there is and why I'm hired in that position or what I'm doing. And it just, I was able to flip back and forth maybe between a strength coach or a physio or a medical provider or whatever else it is. I actually had a friend locally who's a great physio that if most things at the level we were dealing with could be dealt with by a great physio, they can deal with it. So I was like, yeah, go see Andy. Andy and I will talk. I'll help make the program. We'll get our head together, and then at the gym you can do your physio program, and I'll help you to make sure you understand it. Unless it was like a surgery or a really big injury, where I was like, yeah, you got to come to the clinic because like I think I can help with this. But a lot of the people I would just send to my friend who was a great physio. Vice versa, when I'm a physical therapist and I'm treating them as a physio, I'm not making gymnastics programs. I'm not telling them what drills to do. I'm not telling them what techniques to change. I'm trying to understand how they got to me and then try to talk to their coach and understand what they feel they could do to help with these drills or help with these progressions. So I'm just like using my knowledge of gymnastics to help the medical side, but I'm 9 times out of 10 reaching out to the coach and trying to ask about what can we change? What can we do? But yeah, I'm trying to be very clear about, what hat I'm wearing.
Yeah.
And like, how valuable then do you think it is to have a physio for your gymnast that knows the sport of gymnastics?
Massive. It's massive. I think
Yeah.
there's 2 pieces. One is that it's actually pretty challenging to find someone who was a gymnast and really understands it and is really that understanding of both. But you'd be surprised how many really good sports or orthopedic physios there are who are really hungry to learn and they want to help and they have an amazing knowledge set. And if gymnastics would just be a little bit more open-minded and put the handshake halfway and realize I got to help them and teach them and the skill names and the technology and stuff like that. Vice versa, the coach has to be able to come into the gym and see skills and watch how it's trained and understand, like, if you can find someone who is willing to learn the gymnastics stuff, but then you're willing to respect their opinion and actually listen to what they say in terms of injuries or stuff like that, that's a great partnership. So yeah, I think the best money that people can spend is either consulting or hiring someone in is obviously the best, but to have a really good physio and a really good strength and conditioning coach who can be on constant educational chats back and forth, whether it's sharing clients, whether it's whatever, but just having someone to bounce ideas off of, like, one, it's amazing for you to learn, but 2 is you have a trusted inside resource where you really can get someone's opinion. And then vice versa, when they're making return to sport programs, they can come to you and say, hey, Susie has to get back to a standing back tuck on beam, and I don't really know what the progressions are for that. Can you help me maybe understand what we could do over 2 or 3 weeks to slowly go from tumble track to rod strip to the low beam to the high beam? And then they can learn that skill set of progressing back by what they need to do. It's a mutually beneficial thing. But it all starts with, hey, let's have coffee for a couple hours and just shoot the shit on like what you think you want to learn and how you can help and what I can do for you. And just don't talk about money. Don't talk about who's referrals. Just generally be like, are you a good human? Do you have good values that we believe in together? Okay, can we start this connection, this partnership together? And then eventually down the road, it's good for business because you're sending people to them and they're sending people to you, and it's a good word of mouth. And, that works out down the road.
Yeah, literally what happened when we got to Canada.
Nice.
We work in a big facility. They just open a clinic. There's a chiro, sports massage,
There you go.
and physios. I met the guys. Like, you literally are less than 2 minutes away from me.
Yeah.
And he immediately said, look, I was a hockey player because, Canada. And I was a hockey player. Like, I want to learn about, like, if you guys are open, I want to create like a streamlined relationship. You
Sure.
send everyone to me. Like he walked me through like the SFMA. This is how the test works. He did it on
Yep.
me.
Yep.
Solve neck pain for me, just like,
Yep.
just for free, just so that he can help.
Yeah.
We talked a lot. He said, like, I will pop into your gym. Like, he literally blocks off, like a full hour of his schedule, not taking an appointment, coming into the gym, looking.
It's learning.
Yeah. Just learning, slowly figuring it out. Like he mentioned something very interesting. He said, like, when you make rehab for an ankle, for a knee, whatever, you go from hard surface to bounce, right? You go from something that is stable to unstable.
Yeah.
But then said, when you have a kid that is injured and they can start jumping again, you put them on the most unstable apparatus ever when they start from trampoline. And like, we're still trying to figure out, like, how do you blend the two so no one goes so unstable that compensation technique is blended in. Right?
Yeah, I see both sides on this one because I've been in an era of being a medical provider and a coach. Is that
right?
From a coaching point of view, you have to be humble enough to accept the fact that a physio probably knows a lot about these things and has to be willing to help you. And you have to go to bat for them when they make a hard decision, right? Like no medical provider wants to tell a kid they can't compete or pull a kid or whatever else.
Yeah.
But if it's in the best interest of their health, the same way the coach has. And so a coach has to be willing to kind of double down with that person, maybe in the face of a tough parent conversation, and be like, listen, this person just wants what's best for you, and they have a great knowledge set that I don't have. We're going to work together and figure out how you can still keep training. And then a physio has to be willing to also respect a coach's decision or a coach's desire to want to do things and work collaboratively back and forth. I've been a part of some situations where, despite what I think is a really good knowledge of medical and gymnastics, I literally didn't exist in a room full of coaches who thought I wasn't important, I didn't know anything, and that, why should we trust this asshole? But I've also been on the other side as a coach, as someone who didn't fully utilize the medical services and the knowledge of strength coaches in particular, to be humble enough to say, like, I didn't get trained in strength conditioning. It's a full-time career to be a strength coach, right? It's a
Yeah.
full-time career to be a physio. It's a full-time career to be a mental sports psychologist, a full-time career to be a nutritionist. How in the hell do I think that I'm going to know all these things, right? And so it takes the humility to realize that somebody else is really has a good skill set that you can learn from, and also let them do their thing because they're an expert, but at the same time being involved enough to learn a little bit about what they're doing, so it's not just like you're flying blind.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, we have about 10 minutes ish.
Yeah.
Let me ask the most important question that we've been just waiting to ask since we knew this was happening. So, Jamie and I call it the drive phase. You do a round off or a back handspring and you connect it into the next one horizontally.
Yep.
Everyone that has ever done one knows you do that with a hollow back, right? How does that work with deadlifts and squats happening in a neutral spine?
Okay, so just so I'm
Right?
clear on the question, is you're talking about like the round off transition into a back handspring?
Sure. Yeah. Like just think of a line of whips.
Yeah.
Why would I, at the end, like when you take the highest level athlete in the world, they touch the floor in a straight neutral spine,
Yeah.
not in a round spine.
Yeah.
But for personally, like Jamie was like a world-class athlete. I just had the opportunity to jump a lot. It doesn't feel correct to do it.
Yeah.
Right? It doesn't make sense. Like where do we go with this? Like, is it actually healthier to teach it like a deadlift movement? Or is there more going on behind that?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think this comes down to, there's always going to be a tug of war between sport specificity and general, right? There's always going to be this backwards kind of like linear motion between the two. So in the artistic gymnastics world, the best example that I can use, and I'll bridge it back to yours, is there's a very big difference between plyometric punching, which is rigid as a board, super straight, but you might have some hollowing to create forward momentum when you want to do front tucks or whatever. And then like landing properly, feet hip width apart, knees in a proper position to absorb force. So when you're trying to maximally absorb force on your spine and land and dissipate those forces with what's called angular displacement, we know that the way the spinal structures are set up is it's a middle rod of the spine with discs in between and ligaments and things that on their own can really not take a lot of force if they're just floating in space, like in a spine model in the lab. You need this very robust structure of core muscles around it, transverse abdominis, obliques, pelvic floor, diaphragm, anterior, posterior core, whatever. It works best when it's neutral. I mean, neutral is slightly arched for the record because there's a lordotic curve. So, but a braced neutral can absorb more forces compression wise because it disperses outward everywhere than a really hollow spine, right? Because when a really hollow spine is taking load, it flexes this way and it puts pressure backwards, which can create discogenic irritation. So we know from an optimal performance of accepting load, that neutral slight arch with compression and a braced breathing in your pelvic floor diaphragm is aligned, that can spring mechanism take the most impact. Okay. So with that being said, when I have somebody punch on floor, I think it's probably more ideal from a maximal force absorption and pressure to be in a neutral canister. But in the sport specific context, if I'm trying to translate momentum horizontally down the floor to get whip potential, you could see the argument that rounding that shape into a dish or a hollow is going to scoop the feet under and translate that down the floor faster to get more power. So I don't know if I'm answering the question yes or no, which is better. I think it's based on the context, right? It's based on if the goal in the context is to maximally accept vertical force displacement, probably a neutral core is better suited for that. That's why when we hinge, when we squat, when we goblet squat, when we deadlift, we're trying to protect the spine as much as possible and build resilience so that the hinge movement can be developed with more load. The purpose of a deadlift, the purpose of a squat is to get your legs stronger, to get your legs and core stronger, right? So to maximize the load you can move on a deadlift or a squat, the thing that's probably going to be the rate limiting factor is the core handling that load as well and not fatiguing out, because the legs will start to not be able to move if the core buckles in its ability, right? So I think the other thing it comes up with is like push-up position, hollowing in your upper back, right? Like when you do a stalled or stoop in, pressing and rounding thoracic kyphosis and pushing the bars way far away is going to maximize the angular drop. But doing a push-up like that is a terrible idea, right? Because your scaps are pinned down and they can't move. So you should have the skill set and the understanding to use that really large kyphosis when you're doing an in-bar, but then change to a push-up when you're doing a push-up with a flatter T-spine. You should have the ability to find and understand hollow to snap faster down the floor for faster whips if that works for you technically, versus know what neutrals and find that when you're going to land after that double when you land or whatever else it is. So I don't know if I can say it's better or worse to be really hollow or neutral in a whip, because if you look at 100 athletes, you'll probably have 50 to 60 different slight variations of that. But I would make the argument that for maximally handling force, neutral is probably more ideal. So did I even come close to answering your question? Or
Yeah, like the main concern that we have is like, is it inherently dangerous to do it like that with the rounded back, rather than like, is it technically better to do rounded back or straight? Like
Gotcha.
from our understanding of technique, it's definitely technically better to do the rounded back,
because
so
the
that you
position of
can,
center of mass.
make a greater linear movement of your center of mass. But we don't want to do that if it's technically better, but it's going to hurt the gymnast in the long run.
Right. So what we know from research is that it's not so much about a braced flex spine position, it's moving in and out of flexion under load, right? So when you deadlift, if you're lifting and you're deadlifting and you're moving through more angular displacement of flexion, that is probably where we get into hot water, because you're putting a lot of shearing and compressive loads on the spine, versus you watch a strongman lift a stone from the ground, right, or something like that, and they have a nice rigid, they brace the shit out of flexion. There's no actual angular movement of their spine during that stone lift or that deadlift, and they're able to get the load up really, really well. So braced and controlled flexion and just hitting the rebounding might not be as inherently risky as they hit in a rounded back, they move into more of a hollow as they compress, then they go into an arch as they take off. So I think everything is inherently risky, obviously, but if you're looking at maybe the risk profiles, you can handle more load, right, in a braced neutral flexion than moving under load. So I think if you train that technique, you can probably be proficient in protecting your spine against it and using physical preparation to build resilience around that position. That's why like reverse sled drags and deadlifts are really good. But at the same time, it's hard to say that is riskier than a neutral position, because there's literally zero research on that. So I can't tell you that a rounded back deadlift is more risky, or a rounded back whip is more risky than a hollow back whip. But I can tell you that generally speaking, moving under load through flexion is not the most wonderful thing for your spine. So if they're hitting in a rounded position and it's braced and it's trained for, I mean, again, pitching's bad for your arm, bro. Like throwing a ball 90 miles an hour is not good for your arm. But they accept the risk because they want to strike people out. So like maybe that's equation here. If you want to maximize horizontal displacement and get as fast as you possibly can, and it's slightly hollowed and you get that technique to work and you can see it's more efficient, then maybe that's the cost of doing business for doing a laid out triple double.
Okay.
So how do you teach a gymnast to brace like a strong man in the hollow shape in a plyometric movement?
Yeah, that's a great situation. So I wouldn't necessarily train them to bounce in flexion. I would try to build up the sport specific drills around that, right? So like it's teaching good whips, like snap down whip, right? And like teaching how to create body tension on a safe, slow position first. Can you hollow on the floor? Can you dish on the floor and show rounded spine and arms overhead? Can you do that? Okay, let's add a 2 kilo weight. Can we do that with rocks? Can we do that under pressure? Like you just slowly build their capacity in a sport specific way. In the same way, when someone is a kid and they're throwing in baseball, they throw X amount of pitches at X miles per hour or X feet, and it builds up resilience of their elbow over time to handle those forces, right? So you wouldn't ask some kid to do round off whip back hollow right away. You would do loads of physical preparation and loads of core strength and stuff before, in the same way that elite level power lifters wouldn't start with a 100-kilo stone. They would start with a lot of physical prep work and a lot of conditioning work to get their back to do that, and understand this is what it feels like to brace my spine in this flexed position with a 10 kilo, then a 15 kilo, then 25 kilo, right? Over the course of 2 to 3 years. It's the same sport specific conversation. How do you get someone to tolerate the bottom of a stalder when their back is super flexed? And that's the same kind of concept here as well. You start in physical prep. You do stalder ups, very slow. Then you do some rocks. Then you do strap bar. Then you do stoops. Then you do stoop handstands. Then you do some more. Then you do it faster under load. But that takes 6 months to develop. So you can maximize the underlying physical capacity with lots of core work and lots of, specific stuff, which is why I'm such a fan of doing like general weightlifting, because farmer carries and sled pushes are a great way to build up your tolerance to this kind of stuff. But then you slowly just introduce sport specific drills that help kind of build their capacity and build their ability to handle those very sport specific loads. That's what good sports training is on different surfaces, is trying to teach that exposure very slowly over time to build up capacity on top of that.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Like the bracing, I think, will be the next step. Just figuring out how to actually teach bracing.
Yeah. Athletes should understand what hollow versus arch, what neutral feels in all those brace positions. Like a global arch versus a global dish versus a straight line. They should understand and access all those positions to know how to manipulate that for skills.
Yeah, absolutely. And like correctly through the T-spine and not just through the lumbar spine.
Like spreading out the entire body. Yep.
Yeah, that whole thing. Cool.
All right. Yes, we got like another 5 minutes, assuming you need to get on to your next thing. But like, so I wanted to ask, like, before we leave, like, as a good like ending question about, like, as tumbling coaches, we're very interested in what you would say specifically towards like tumbling, how we could improve. Like, because I've learned a couple like things from you reading your blogs, your email, and things like that like really changed me. Well, thank you. You're giving out this free information is amazing. But like it's really like changed me as a coach, like a couple of things. The one being like it's not the amount of load that's a problem, it's the amount of load the body's ready for. And the second thing being, which has really changed my mentality, is optimization over maximization that I've learned through your blogs. So like on that idea, like, do you know, or like, is there anything that you would say towards tumbling coaches and tumbling athletes specifically, how we can make our sport a lot better when it's a sport that's definitely built around maximization and about just load?
The first piece is that Tim Gavitt gets all the credit for the first one, that's 100% like from a research article from Tim. So I need to give him the shout out. On the second piece, and kind of all together, is I think a concept that's really important for all gymnastics, but particularly tumbling, is that these basic shapes you have to get to maximize power, whether it's an arch, whether it's a hollow, whether it's an impact and twisting, whatever. Sometimes the basics of the basics are what need more attention. What I mean by that is, do you have the ability to open your hips fully into extension and get your arms fully over your head, your T-spine to extend? Do you have a very strong basis of your legs to handle that force and a very strong basis of your core? And I think, again, not to, beat a dead horse or go too crazy, but like, that's why I'm such an advocate of evidence-based strength and conditioning and weight training as a complement to gymnastics training. I think that it fills in the gaps of what you're not doing, because a really good sports performance program, which is what we preach, with a hybrid model where maybe you're doing this, it builds in eccentrics for active flexibility. It builds in leg strength to build up some of the dynamic stabilization against some of these high impact forces. It builds up farmer carries and sled carries and stuff that protect you against the forces of tumbling. So the programs that I think are really doing it well, they're aware that doing your sport over and over and over again inherently sometimes will make you lose some flexibility, or it'll make your strength come down as the course of a competition season goes on because you're tired. Or as kids grow, they lose shoulder flexibility. And so if you could better understand the screens and the tools to look at shoulder flexibility, T-spine flexibility, hip flexibility, but then also have markers of strength, whether it's a counter movement jump or a squat jump or a hollow hold or a handstand, right? Like, just consistently checking those boxes every like 6 months or a year, that someone is falling, maybe drifting too far away from that just really good open shoulder arch angle with T-spine and hip extension, and knowing how to screen those and knowing how to correct those that really is probably the best opportunity, which is I know what goes into an arch shape from a kinetics and an anatomy point of view, and I can understand how to help somebody with that, with flexibility or whatever. But I'm also using strength and conditioning, gymnastics specific, and tumbling to maximize their capacity to handle these forces, because all injuries, man, are just an equation of force more than capacity. Whether you blow your ACL out in one time because the force just rocks you in the perfect way to pivot, or it's death by 1,000 cuts of shin splints or plantar fasciitis or back pain that like just a little tick, a little tick, a little tick, you didn't recover, a little tick, didn't recover, a little tick. That's where a lot of these overused things come from. So strength and conditioning, and then really good technique and really good basics and really good flexibility fundamentals, they essentially allow you to build up capacity in a way that doesn't overload your joints. You can build your capacity higher and higher and higher. The combination of gymnastics specific stuff and also hybrid, maybe weight training, you have more at a capacity to work with to handle those forces over and over again. So that's probably the best offering I can give you, which is understanding how to screen out flexibility and how to fix those things, how to really make sure your strength conditioning program is well-rounded and has a balance of both, and how to have, do you really know what a round off should look like? What does a hurdle look like from a great technical position of where your eyes should look and how you should whip your hands? Like if you really understand technical basics and foundation plus flexibility plus strength, then obviously this culture conversation of communication, that is all the raw elements to have a really successful gym environment.
Amazing.
Really good.
Amazing. Yeah, we don't want to keep you. Yeah, we're already 5 minutes past. We just don't want to keep you too long.
It's all good, man.
Yeah, because obviously, as I've said, the iPad is, full of everything.
Yeah, we
flattered
didn't
by
get
that.
to the questions.
I'm
We'll have to
flattered
do
by
another.
that.
Of course, man.
I think we
Of
did a
course.
good job. I think we did a good
Very
job.
good.
Absolutely, yeah. It was definitely a pleasure learning from you.
Yeah.
I appreciate you guys a lot. I really do.
Yeah. Let me do.
Yeah, definitely going to need to do another podcast to
Sure.
get through all of these questions.
Absolutely.
Totally.
Yeah.
If we will.
Absolutely.